essentially, I wanted to ask, in the panel there was a lot of this idea that there's a they. There's this group of people, this they, who are trying to indoctrinate our children. And I just wanted to get up and I wanted to say, who was they? Because it's such an important question that doesn't get discussed. Because, I was having a conversation with my mum, and it was like, we were talking about how the elites will use certain minorities of people to promote their own self-affirmation in terms of their morality, because they're, the elites and they have no morals. But what do you think?
Well, for starters, I'm obviously trans and been out 20 odd years, and I have never been sent the sign-up document or the gender ideological pamphlet manual on how to be a trans activist, on how to be ideological. I've seen views within trans evolve anyway, but there has been a hard lining. Part of that is the politicization and the kind of the social media angst around the whole thing. I've also seen the conspiracy theories that actually the whole thing is being driven by pharmacological, medical, everything, that kind of thing, and that there is this capitalist pharmacological market trying to sell us HRT, and it's all the rest of it. If you want to sell HRT to people, actually give it to the women with menopause who actually can't get hold of it. They're a bigger market than the trans people. So the idea that there's a big kind of, pharmacological kind of indoctrination market there is wrong. I think teachers are just trying to do the right thing by the kids and their pupils. They're just trying to have happy people in their classes. I don't think they're indoctrinating. I did think the last point was interesting about the fact that there has been a kind of a hijacking of some young people's identity language and then being taught back to them by adults who don't 100% get it, and then they're presenting things as options rather, and choices rather than simply descriptors of other people. So who is doing it? I don't think there's a massive conspiracy, but I do think there are misguided allies. I do think that we are creating spaces where we're offering things as opposed to just allowing the space for exploration. When you start telling people, yes, when you grow up, there's a choice. You can be who you want to be. You can be a boy. You can be a girl. You actually are putting it a little bit out there into people's minds. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy around it, but in the name of kind of allyship, being nice and being kind and putting it into the atmosphere out there, it's suggestive. I think the agency has to come from the kids and the young people themselves. And when they say we need to create a space in which kids can say how they feel, but we're not telling them how they should feel, or if they feel a certain way, that now means they're this. If that makes sense. But I do not think... the funniest thing was when I was involved in the whole Stonewall, LGBTI, do they go those directions? It was a standing joke amongst trans people in 2014 that they didn't agree with each other. And Ruth Hunt managed to get 50 trans people and organisations all to agree with each other and for Stonewall to go LGBT. When we got 6 intersex organisations in the room, they all disagreed with each other, and that's why Stonewall didn't go LGBTI. But it was really funny that Stonewall actually became the glue that actually got trans people to agree with each other, interestingly. Not in a kind of conspiratorial way. And this came from a lesbian leader of Stonewall, Ruth Hunt. But it was interesting. It galvanised things, I think, because trans people were a bunch of disparate small organisations with very little voice. And Stonewall gave them a voice, gave them a platform, and actually accelerated the kind of understanding in the public sphere. So I would say Stonewall were a catalyst. I don't think they were conspiratorial. And Ruth actually took on the job and said, look, I want to have the discussion about trans if I take on this job. And she had the discussion. They didn't decide what they wanted to do. They asked 50 trans people in organisations, but they created and they solidified a movement that was disparate. And I think that was one of the biggest things that has seen the acceleration. And I don't think it's put things in people's minds, but it has concretely brought together this divided movement in that sense. That's my feeling, and because I was involved in parts of it. But I also think that since 2018, then the choice to go no debate was the wrong choice. And I think that has then created the political division and atmosphere. As soon as, the reform of the Gender Recognition Act came onto the tables, and then it was a case of like, yes, we want to reform it, but we will not debate it with anyone. So it's not up for discussion. Whereas actually getting trans on board at Stonewall in 2014, 15, 16 was all about having a discussion. And then once that decision was made, this 2018, we will not discuss with anyone who critiques it. That was the wrong way to go. And I think half of the stuff that we've got the last 4 years wouldn't have happened if we'd been willing to have conversations with people outside of Stonewall, outside of LGBT, etc., to talk about the impacts on others. And that is part of the Equality Act as well, is to discuss what are the impacts on others and what are the intersections. And I think it's that lack of conversation from 2018 that has caused it to implode into this binary war between sex and gender. I don't know if that fully answers your question.
It does.
But seriously, there is no ideological pamphlet that we're meant to sign up to. But you do hear bits of it going viral on the internet.
Yeah.
Like whether it's, you see the standard kind of tweet, trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are non-binary people, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's not the hill I'm going to die on.
No.
Because I can stand up for the immutability of sex, but the freedom to change and express your body as two completely acceptable but different things.
Yeah.
Because F. Scott Fitzgerald, that's the sign of a great intelligence, of being able to hold these two different ideas in hand at the same time that may even seem contradictory, but can be individually equally true. So yeah, I can argue sex is immutable. But I can also argue that you have the freedom to express your gender the way you want, and you have the right to change your body once you've achieved Gillick competence, kind of an adult mental state, and you may or may not have the funds to do so, that kind of thing. So they're two different things, but you can hold both as true.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. That's really helpful.
Do you mind if I just ask my quick two questions and I'll be out your way? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Just quick.
Please do.
Thank you. Right, take care.
Okay, I've only got two quick questions, if that's all right.
happy waiting?
I'll get out of this young lady's way. My first question, I suppose, I think a lot of people would have been surprised on the panel when you didn't immediately opt for the affirmation model and kind of suggested a more holistic approach, which, like I say, people may have been surprised about. But isn't that sort of part of the problem that many on both sides of this debate expect transgender people to all hold the same views on these issues?
I mean, this is kind of the thing I was just talking about as well. There isn't one way of being trans. There is not one way of thinking about trans, but the only voices that we hear are either this kind of apparent trans rights activist voice, around which, if you do not agree with that particular line, you are sidelined from that trans community. And I've seen my kind of opportunities to speak or stand up at rallies and speak being not cancelled, but no longer invited, simply because they know that I might have a more moderate position or open to others' viewpoint. So I do think it's kind of difficult, the direction we're going in there, that there isn't the freedom to even have diversity within trans voices. I think my therapeutic holistic view comes from my own personal journey, so it is biased. And it's how I got to where I went to, and I got there by actually questioning everything and then still doing it. And I did that. It was a very, very long process by personal choice in part, but also because the actual process on the NHS in the UK is a long process. You won't get anywhere in under 4 years, and it's typical that it will be 6 to 9 years before you achieve your gender dreams, if you want to call them that. So it is a slow process, but it's the gaps in that process that need to be plugged with better mental health support, better wellness, better conversations. Conversations, as we were talking about in the hall, with the kids, hearing from the kids, not telling the kids, but when the kids tell the adults, to listen. But it doesn't mean to affirm, but it does mean to respect. And then to instead ask, okay, you just told me you're what? You were assigned female at birth, and your what is you are now a boy and you want to pursue a gender transition. That's fine. Now tell me your journey. Now tell me your why. Now tell me what you feel. You don't have to immediately come down and say you are not that thing. You don't have to kind of go down the doubt line, to simply ask, okay, now fill in the gaps for me. What is the backstory to getting from your being assigned female at birth to you identifying as male now and wanting to do something about it? What is your backstory? Tell me your story. That's how empathy starts. And that's how then understanding happens. And that's when you might spot additional kind of comorbid issues, which may be contributing to it or may be solvable separate to it. I heard of a big mistake when a trans man, quite soon after surgery, they dropped his antidepressant medication because they said, well, you're fine now. Actually, the depression was nothing to do with the gender dysphoria. He still had the depression afterwards, and he actually took his own life eventually because they didn't continue to treat the depression because they assumed the gender dysphoria was the root of all problems. We live complex, intersectional, non-single issue lives. So we need to continue to treat all of these things. Give someone the help they need because they're autistic, because they have borderline personality, because they have anorexia, and the trans alongside it, and see where they intersect. But we need to kind of listen, treat, and caringly, empathically kind of respond to all of those situations rather than getting into a political ideological solution in that sense.
That's a really comprehensive answer. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate your time.